To FO Exclusive. I'm Atul Singh, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. With me is none other than Glenn Carl, a retired CIA officer who's now senior partner at FOI. In November, we examine two, not our usual three issues. I repeat, we examine two issues because both of them, to use Glenn's words, are consequential. The two issues are why Donald Trump won again, what happens now, why the EU is in crisis, what lies ahead. So, without further ado, Glenn, why Donald Trump won again and what happens now? Shoot.
The subject that I think everyone in America has been wondering about, and many people in the world. We're talking about two subjects, but I think we really are talking about one, perhaps, which is the changed world or the changing world that all of us are living in or experiencing, whether in the Northeast of the United States, as I am, or in Kyiv or in Beijing or anywhere between, below, and above. It's, I think, the most significant moment, certainly one of the most significant moments in world history, or phases, because it's not a single moment, phases in the past, well, in centuries even, on the level of 1945, more than 1989, 1945, 1917, 1815. I mean, the world is radically, substantially at least, changing. So why did he win? And what does it mean? I think it is not too detailed or insignificant detail oriented or focused to illustrate what I think has happened with two or three brief anecdotes or stories. The first was a couple of decades ago, although it could have been today or could have been even further in the past. My father was, it was a work day. My father was going to a meeting in an office building. He was entering the building from outside. And as he went through the door, he saw the person behind him, and he held the door. The person was a woman, and she laced into him for being sexist, condescending, part of the patriarchy, et cetera, which of course infuriated my father. And he said, I was just trying to be considerate. But for her, he was all of the things that she said. A few years ago, several years ago, not very long, I was teaching a course at university. One of my students had always sat in the back, had never spoken, always seemed, by expression, insecure, unsure, hesitant, timid. And I obliged all of the students to make some presentation during the semester. She did, and I thought it was really good. At the end of the presentation, I said something to the effect of, that was really good, or this was great, or thank you for such good, whatever I said. And she smiled. I then said, that's what I like to see. I was trying to be encouraging. I was called to the front office by the university's administration because that was either she, I believe it was she, or someone else in the class, but I'm pretty sure it was she, complained that I had been sexist. I was simply trying to buck her up. And it was, in my mind, conscious and I think unconscious, irrelevant that she was a female. Not too long ago, just two quick other ones, I went to buy an ice cream. And I said, and this is, I'll get into some local dialect here. I said, I'll have this flavor of ice cream, cone, And would you please put as many jimmies as you can? The word is jimmies, and that means chocolate sprinkles in Boston dialect. And the person I was with jumped on me, one of the people I was with, and said, "You can't say that. That is racist." It's not racist. It never has been racist. I can't swear that I know the etymology of the word jimmies in Boston dialect, but it has been seized upon by, quote, the woke segment of society as patronizing and characterizing someone behind the soda stand, probably as an inferior black, and that's not the case in the least. One, Boston almost didn't have blacks for most of Boston's history, and it's simply not true. But the facts are irrelevant, and that is how it has now been characterized. And so I was I couldn't even buy an ice cream without even being denounced as racist. And it truly was not a racist, is not a racist term, although it has now been seized upon and become controversial. The last one, more nationally consequential, but the same point, is in the recent election, or it became an issue that Democrats, the left, really the left, the progressives, have started to frankly denounce, castigate people who use the term Latina or Latino, which means a Latin a female who was of Latin origin, or a male, and that was has been denounced as sexist and unacceptable. Therefore, and one must say Latinx, and that's sort of stupid, frankly, because Spanish uses gender in its terms, and they aren't condescending one way or the other. They actually add a little bit more information in the spot in description. But I think that the Latin community, in particular, since it touches upon their language, their heritage, their sense of selves, reacted the way I did to the being denounced for having said Jimmy's expression. So I think these are not just inconsequential little frictions of among friends and associates, but speak to what even I, and I consider myself, I think others consider me a progressive person, find insufferable, because um, I'm not an acceptable citizen, and I am a racist because I did something that is inconsequential and actually doesn't imply what my denunciation of me implies it is. I think that that is fundamental in what has happened in the election and why Donald Trump won. Um, that's tied to the changing social diversity of American society, and it's tied to immigration. I've said a couple of times, I think, on this forum, that when I was born, America was 89%, that's the statistic, white. And today it is 52 or 3. Um, I think this is an enriching change. But if I'm denounced for saying ordering an ice cream, or if a Latino American or a Latino person or Latina person residing here is denounced for speaking his or her language as the language is spoken, that creates, I think, a pretty fundamental, visceral rejection of being portrayed as an outcast or a bad person. The immigration, the social changes, the pressure to conform. This is a deep thread in American society, in all societies. But if you read Alexis de Tocqueville, he talks about the tyranny of the majority and how um, there is democracy, but and there will be laws protecting various behaviors or freedoms, but the pressure to conform socially is intense, and you will be uh, cast out of society if you don't conform, um, which is a totalitarian impulse in many ways. Um,
Then, very quickly, it's not just the tyranny of the majority, because what insiders in the Democratic Party, insiders even in the Joe Biden White House have been complaining is that the left in the Democratic Party has gone stark raving mad. It is a tiny minority that is forcing these language changes, that is fixated on pronouns. And yes, it is cascading through society, but it's pushed through by a small group which has the privilege of outrage. They're all people not exactly like you, but people who went to the same institutions as you. They went to the Harvards, they went to the
You've
Yales, they went to the
overeducated the
Princetons, they went to the Ivy Leagues, and have now seized upon justice, social justice agendas. They're often called social justice warriors. And our democratic sources have been saying repeatedly that the party has abandoned economic agendas. If not in reality, at least under the Joe Biden White House, they did try to have an industrial policy. They tried to reconnect with the working class. But in narrative, in discourse, in campaigning, they've abandoned the economic agenda for the social agenda. Over to you, sir.
yeah. All of these things are tied also to they're partly phenomena caused by or at least in line with the effects of globalization, which has um, economically stressed, disenfranchised the post-World War II middle and working class. As it's not a fiction that low-cost labor from everywhere else in the world um, has undercut the employment that provided middle class and at least working class solid incomes to a large segment of, well, all industrial advanced society populations, but we're talking about the United States. So, which is why you have the shift over the past 15, 20 years of Ohio, a critical state, from solidly Democratic to solidly, even ardently, Republican. Because as the jobs go and one can't buy an ice cream without being characterized as a bad person, people get angry and say, well, wait a moment here. Other factors that have exploited these changes, and I think exploited is the accurate word. There truly has been, I think, a discernible. I don't think there is a discernible impact by the decades-long, sustained, intense, targeted, and phenomenally effective Russian intelligence efforts to um, exacerbate these social frictions and tensions, not with the objective of supporting Donald Trump necessarily, or any particular party, but to foment increasing discord and disaffection with American institutions and society, and to turn the
So you're
black
talking
against
about
the white.
Vladislav Surkin.
Sir, yes, yeah, the father of the program. But
Yeah.
it's not just a former intelligence officer obsessing about intelligence. This is empirically demonstrated, not just demonstrable, the effect that Russian intelligence has had upon the National Rifle Association, the Republican Party, specific candidates, um, and more broadly, entire social groups. And it's not that I, Russian intelligence officer, will plant data datum X and have everyone believe that. No, it's more if you challenge convention and challenge truth and inject friction, even if it is disbelieved, it is occurring. This is, I can tell you that I'm now going to lie to you. Be ready, I'm going to lie to you. So you're forewarned. And I'll say 2 and 2 is 5. And you say, no, well, that's silly. It's not 5. 2 and 2 is 4. Everybody knows it's 4. You think, well, that's the end of that. What a futile exercise on my part. No, it is shown that people actually reason differently after hearing an untruth, even if they know it is untrue. And so, done at a massive, insidious, because quiet but pervasive level for decades, it truly has had a phenomenal successful effect if you're Russian intelligence, and a harmful one in
Hold
America.
fire, hold fire. When Soviets ran the KGB, and Soviets must have tried the same thing. What's different now?
What is different? That's a good question. What's different is the next point, which is critical. That in the last 40 years, almost exactly, technology has revolutionized how all of us receive the world and perceive the world around us. You've had the rise of the internet, of the cell phone, of cable television, which is now becoming obsolete. But what that has meant is that rather than having mediated, moderated, frankly, filtered um, information coming through professional sources, which may be biased, but nonetheless have the filter of an editor, you now have the almost infinite stovepiping of information. If I happen to only want to hear things that speak in praise of transgender life, I can go to sources that do that. Or if I think that they are the antichrist and destroying life as it should be lived, I can find that, and people do. And we all know, but it's important to have in our consciousness that people, all of us, look for sources of information that affirm and reaffirm our preconceptions. And so you have Fox News saying X, and MSNBC saying Y, and Atul Singh and Glenn Carl saying Z, and uh, no one, society frankly becomes more disaggregated than it has been ever. You also have, in some ways, the apotheosis of the American and Western ideals, which is the rise of individual rights, which means that the drunk at the end of the bar, or I sitting talking to you, in theory, should be given equal weight to the candidate for president of the Democratic or Republican parties, respectively. My views on trade, why should you be right? Elon Musk, who may know nothing about anything on certain subjects, because he has an opinion, it is equally valid, and probably more so because he's 150 billion or 250 billion dollars with which to disseminate his views. So all of that has led to the fracturing, really, of any social cohesion, but not any, but the fracturing of social cohesion, which can be exploited by the factors I spoke about before. So I think all of these things. And then there are the more traditional issues, of course. There's the perception of inflation. Actually, core inflation is 1.9%, which is historically low, but it doesn't matter because if the worker in Ohio is aggrieved and stressed, and has been for 2 generations, about his status, his life, and his family's economic future, then that's what the reality is.
Glenn,
Yeah,
could I quickly jump in and then we'll go into what happens now?
yeah.
What I'm hearing
Anyway,
and what
so I
I'm
think just the last sentence to conclude, there are specific issues such as inflation, um, uh, transgender issues, and so on. But I think fundamentally you have a social phenomenon which has not played to, but yeah, explains the Republican triumph, and it was a triumph.
uh, um, let us look at some of the more conventional issues cropping up. And what I'm reading and listening is that immigration certainly played a part. It even played a part for recent immigrants who didn't want more immigrants depressing their wages. We had inflation. Yes, core inflation may be low, Glenn, but the graph by managing partner of FOI, Sanjay Acharya, shows that food inflation consistently outpaced real earnings. And we can blame higher energy prices for it. We can blame the Russia-Ukraine war for it. We can blame price gouging for it. We can blame concentration of power when it comes to groceries, because over the last few decades, there has been unrestricted M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Banks have become too big to fail. They've become even bigger to fail post bailout. Grocery chains have become too big to fail. Maybe not too big to fail, but too big. Even chicken processing companies, there are a few, and everyone is a subcontractor. So inflation uh, has hit, especially food inflation, masses. The economy was an issue. People were concerned about the cost of living crisis in particular. And what do I mean by the cost of living crisis? Well, the cost of living crisis, as I was speaking to a young Democrat yesterday, and he said, look, we were getting poll after poll about the fact that people didn't like it that healthcare cost an arm and a leg. Childcare was prohibitively expensive. University costs have shot up, and that, of course, you know very well. College tuition is ridiculous. House prices and rents have gone up enormously. Housing insurance has skyrocketed too. Um, Secure Save, a financial technology platform, conducted a survey and found that 63% of American employees are unable to cover a $500 emergency response. They don't have $500 lying around in spare change. 63%. So there is certainly a major economic problem. And these are tectonic trends. You can't blame it on just Joe Biden or just Kamala Harris or, for that matter, Donald Trump before Joe Biden. But these are real issues. And in addition to these issues, there were other issues. For instance, Gaza and Lebanon. One of our authors, Joseph Olmert, an Israeli, the brother of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, he said that if you want Arab votes into Detroit, you may not be able to get Jewish votes in Philadelphia. So there is that splintering of the social cohesion, not just on identity politics, but also interest groups. And there are interest groups in the Democratic Party that are very strong. In fact, young uh, party aides, policymakers constantly say in private, some say in public, something has gone terribly wrong with the Democratic Party. Voters, especially voters who are minorities, let's say Latina mother of three, or a Muslim mother of four, they certainly don't want same bathrooms for transgender women as for their daughters. They do not want transgender women competing with their daughters. And the Democrats were speaking at people instead of speaking to them. They had this extraordinary savior complex, in a way, very similar to the Puritans. We have our version of the Holy Book. And if you don't believe in us, you are a sinner and you're damned and you'll go to hell. And
Mhm.
Satan will roast you over a slow fire. And this, this obsession with trans issues that are a tiny percentage of the population, mind you, gender affirming care, as they call it, or let's say sex change operations, they cost an arm, a leg. And when people are hurting, they see this as frivolous, privileged, and utterly out of touch. And there are
Well, I would say
comments,
even they see them as totalitarian.
yes, indeed, woke totalitarians. So
Mhm.
point is, there was a complete abdication of the working class in some ways. The Democratic Party has become a party of metropolitan elites. Many Democrats are saying this. It is no longer a party of the working classes, and it is no longer a party of the minorities. There's this sense of entitlement. We are for immigration, therefore minorities will vote for us. But no, not if you obsess about cultural issues, because at the end of the day, minority families are socially even more conservative than, say, uh, white working class families. Because traditional Muslim family will get, or a traditional Indian Hindu family will get an apoplectic fit if their daughters and sons arrive and say, "Oh, we are gay." Forget about we want to be trans. We want to have expensive surgery, and then that begs the question: who pays for it? And here, uh, the Republican campaign ran that extraordinary ad, Kamala is for they, them, I'm for you. That is the Donald Trump political campaign, and that resonated not just with white voters, but with black voters too. And note that a majority of Hispanic men or Latino men voted for Donald Trump. So you can't just say, oh, it's just a race issue now. I mean, this is really alarming for the Democratic Party. They have lost too many groups of people. And someone, who's worked in media organizations said he had to go through crazy diversity training, even though he's a minority. In places like NPR, New York Times, and everyone was
Well, it's a
obsessed
federal
about
requirement.
pronouns, and you had to use
It's a,
they,
it's a
them.
federal requirement. Yeah.
Wow. And now that is insanity. That is absolutely insanity, because this obsession with pronouns, particularly when people are hurting, particularly when you have a cost of living crisis, this campaign, this faux campaign of hope and joy, this comes across as fake. And yes, we can say wrong campaign, wrong candidate. You can come up with the theory that the old mad king didn't abdicate the throne. It's a tragedy like King Lear. All of that is true. But perhaps there's a deeper question. Yes, we have lost social cohesion, which Ibn Khaldun, a 14th century philosopher, called Sabia. Yes, everyone is going in 500 different directions in Brownian motion. But also, there is something terribly wrong, not only with the Republican Party, but with the Democratic Party. And that we cannot escape. So on to now, what happens now, Glenn? Will we have a
Right. Well,
brave
that's
new world? Will we have a
well.
sonic
I think that we
boom
may.
in the economy?
Um, one of my classmates has spent his career. Uh, his name is Grover Norquist. So this
Ah,
is a fellow who finished
famous.
college with me nearly 50 years ago, and he's a little known name, but an historically significant, consequential figure, because he's devoted his life to attacking the administrative state. And he has always said from the time that he and I were classmates and government majors together that his objective, therefore the Republican Party's objective, uh, is to reduce the size of the federal government by 50%. 50%. That the federal government should only consist of border control guards and an army. And I'm not exaggerating. What to do with the army, since they are also isolationists, is another question. I guess stave off invasion when it comes, otherwise to do nothing. But to be very strong. That has become, and has been for a good number of years, the policy objective of now the ruling elements of the Republican Party. When you hear Steve Bannon and other um, thinkers for the incoming administration speak, now he's more firebomb throwing than Grover Norquist, even at least in rhetoric. But they talk about destroying, and Steve Miller, who's influential advisor to be and currently of the incoming Trump administration. When you hear them talking about destroying or taking hacksaws to, whatever the phrases they use, to the administrative state, this is what they intend to do, and the belief they have. It is coherent. One can oppose it, but it's not insane. Well, I think it's nearly insane, but it is quite coherent. And linked to that is a concept called the theory of the unitary executive. And what that gets at, and this is another Grover Norquist Republican Party objective, is the view that the American constitutional system and system of government is inefficient and ill-suited for any state, or but certainly for a superpower. If you have the separation of powers, you have inefficiency. That was done by design intentionally by the founding fathers to avoid the concentration of power and authoritarianism or loss of democracy. But the alternative view is that, if we need to build a highway, we can't because everyone gets a veto, to put it, in grossly simple terms. But there's a lot of truth to that. And so they want to centralize power in the executive. Does this ring any bells? It should, because Donald Trump, who's not a conceptual thinker, nonetheless has been influenced by and subscribes to, by his own instincts and thinking, this approach to government. It is totalitarian. But you combine the destruction of the, quote, administrative state, which they call the deep state, which is a fascist term, and there's no such thing as a deep state. There is an administrative state. I won't get into these weeds for the moment. With the theory of the unitary executive, and you have a much smaller government that leaves people to their own devices. So, as Anatole France, a French philosopher and writer of the 19th century, said, that pure laissez-faire capitalism, small government anywhere, leaves people free to sleep under a bridge if they have no money. So you have a hacksaw being taken to the social structures of the federal government and services, and concentration of power. It's easy to break things. It is far harder to put Humpty Dumpty back together. So what we are seeing is an historic, probably, shift in the nature of American government. Now, there remain many Republicans who are wary of cutting Social Security and so on and so forth. So it's not
I mean,
simply that
to
he's
object, I mean, Donald Trump was not going to cut Social Security because his
well,
white working
no,
class voters depend on
he'll
it.
do it if
And
he'll do it if he doesn't suffer too much from it, and he won't if he does. I mean, he has no particular views on anything in that regard. Um, if you listen to his interviews, literally from 1989, 1988, choose the year, decades ago, you only have to do one thing to change what he said then, and it is identical to what he says now. You replace the word Japan with the word China. So 40 years ago, he was saying Japan was we are the laughing stock. Japan is eating our lunch. Today he says we are a laughing stock. China is eating our lunch. Unquote.
to push back
Okay.
there, push back a little bit, he's not the only one. You have Marco Rubio, you have a national security advisor coming in who also has strong views on China. MIT economists published a paper, The China Shock. Jobs have gone from Ohio, have gone from Michigan, have gone from numerous American states to China
Mhm.
and elsewhere. So the white working class has been left high and dry by globalization. There is no way to ignore that. And in a way, the left behinds have had their revenge now. So that is true.
Yes,
Now,
I
the,
agree. I agree.
and,
Yeah.
and the tariffs, in a way, are a response to that pain. Now, they may lead to inflation. Things we buy on Walmart and Amazon would cost a lot more, but that's a different story. The theory is
Mhm.
increase tariffs, um, bring back jobs to America, have higher, have let's say 3% GDP growth, limit the budget deficit to 3% and increase oil and gas production by 3%. So when I'm talking to Republicans, they are saying if they can knock off red tape, if they can lower the cost of energy, if they can uh, use tariffs, then they will be able to stimulate the domestic economy and bring jobs back home. So there is an internal consistency to their logic. Uh, what happens now? Will they actually achieve this?
Well, also, energy costs are, I think, in real terms, lower than since before the oil shock of 1973, which
But
means,
they want to lower it even
almost
further.
everybody's, in almost anyone's lifetime. But okay, I think the consequences are American democracy is, at the very least, at the point where it may change fundamentally. I think that it will, towards a more frankly authoritarian, centralized, and thinner structure. You'll see deregulations, so the rich will get richer, and the poor, who are looking to to their elected leaders the ones they chose to help them will find themselves actually in a tougher way. Although it's true, protectionism can raise employment by in some sectors while causing general overall lowering of living standards. And then you'll find that the America's trade and diplomatic alliances and networks are at the very least strained. And we'll talk about this, I think, more in the next section. It's a different world. The Pax Americana, which has struggled for 2 decades, is probably put paid to now.
Right. One observation, and this does not pertain to any political party. This is an observation from an ex-MI6 friend. And he said that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, came out with a judgment against Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. And he said that we keep speaking about the norms-based order, the normative order, the rules-based order. And the moment one of the institutions that supposedly upholds these norms that we help create comes out with a judgment, we rail against that very order. We just say, oh, no, 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 the court has got it wrong. And his point was that you can't keep writing the rules and breaking them. You can't keep speaking about a norms-based order and then say, oh, court or the institution has got the norms wrong. And he went on to go through institution after institution. He pointed to both George W. Bush and Donald Trump walking out of climate deals, Paris and Kyoto. He pointed to the US leaving the anti-ballistic missile treaty just unilaterally. He pointed out, more importantly, to the US weakening the World Trade Organization. That has happened under both Democrat and Republican organizations. So, to your point, the death knell of post-1945 world, the Pax Americana, the norms-based order, has been sounded on October 7, 2023, in your own words. So we will be living in a brave new world, which Donald Trump will only accelerate.
I subscribe, agree, nod my head.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.